name is Harry Burkholder. I'm the Executive Director of the Land Information Access Association. We're a nonprofit here in Traverse City. If you've gone by the Best Western on Munson, we're the big building with the big mural on the side. And we are leading an effort to develop a water trail on the Boardman River. And some of you are asking, what the heck is a water trail? I've been paddling on the Boardman River for years, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And I really want to set the context for the planning activity that we're trying to do, and then really hear from you. So this tonight is really about hearing from the folks in the community about Boardman River and what they want to see. You see all these boards around the room, lots of stickers. We're going to give you a chance to use those. How many folks have paddled the entire length of the Boardman, let's say from the Forks all the way to the bay? Hands up. Good, all right. Well, we're going to kind of walk through that. So just a little bit of a background on the project. There's really two parts to this project. The county, Grand Traverse County, received funding from the Coastal Zone Management Program with contributions from Rotary Cherries to do two trail planning projects. The first one is for the West Boardman Lake non-motorized pathway. That effort is being led by TART. Some of you might have been to some of those meetings. The second part of this project is to develop a water trail on the Boardman River, or really come up with a plan for what that would entail. So they're two separate projects, but they obviously commingle, especially at different points along Boardman Lake as we move forward. So that's really the project itself. And you're saying, well, what is a water trail? Can you help me define what that is? And the difference really is small, but it's important. So we've all probably have our own paddling guides that you've got at the bookstore for years that you've paddled all around the state of Michigan. The difference really is the third bullet point here that you see on the slide. Water trails are defined as obviously a recreational route on a waterway. It's supported by a network of public access points, and it's really supported by broad-based community partnerships. And we've seen different water trails across the state. Some group or a coalition of groups or a collection of local governments have basically said we're going to take ownership of this idea of creating a recreational trail on our waterway. That's really the big difference between paddling route and a water trail. And it's really a no-brainer for Michigan, a no-brainer for our region, considering the number of rivers that we have and all the over 3,000 miles of Great Lakes shoreline. This was a map that's about 5 years old. This is the number of water trails in the state of Michigan. At that time, there were 9. Today, there are 41 and growing. A lot of the effort's been pushed by the Coastal Zone Management Program to develop these water trails, but also local governments, watershed groups all over the state are working to define these waterways as a recreational entity and activity. And they go from all the regions that we can think of. So our most urban areas in downtown Detroit on the Detroit River to our most natural areas, there's really a defined water trail. So this is an up-and-coming theme in terms of trails in the state of Michigan, to the point now where we have almost every mile of Great Lakes coastline has a defined water trail on it. And we have over 1,200 miles of inland water trails and growing. In terms of this project, we're right about here. Well, we are not about here, we are here, July 27th. We've been working with a team of stakeholders to start to identify some of the concerns or issues related to paddling on the Boardman River, some of the assumptions about what it means to paddle on the Boardman River, and what do we want to see in terms of amenities or improvements to create a water trail on the Boardman River. We've also done an extensive inventory of all the access sites. So at Brown Bridge and Shumsky's, what do we have? What kind of parking do we have? Is there trash? Is there restrooms? So a really robust inventory of what's on the river that supports paddlers. And then we're also interviewing different groups that are doing work on the Boardman River, whether it's CRA or others, kind of getting their take on what does it mean to have a paddling route or a water trail on the Boardman River or on this waterway. What are the things that we need to be looking out for? But tonight, we really want to hear about your perspective on that. And again, I'll get into that in terms of what the open house activities are. Based on your feedback, we hope to then come up with a set of assumptions about what this water trail will look like, what this paddling route will look like, and how it will move forward. That will have some goals and objectives and priorities in terms of the amenities that we might want to include at these access sites. The hard part is then figuring out how we implement that, and we haven't really figured that out. Right now, a lot of the different amenities and access sites are overseen by different entities, whether that's the state of Michigan, whether it's the local jurisdiction. They're doing separate improvements. And so really this effort is to kind kind of coalesce those efforts into kind of one plan, so we kind of slowly build what this water trail will be. At the end, we really have to have a document that says this is how we want to develop the water trail. And how that gets implemented, again, is something we're still trying to figure out. I think some of the ideas and concepts that you help us develop could go into local parks and recreation plans and then be eligible for grants. But we do have the hope to have a planning document at the end of this process. In terms of the scope of the water trail that we've been talking about, essentially from the Forks to Clinch Park, which is roughly 29 miles, is really the part of the Boardman that we're talking about in terms of that defined water trail. Obviously, it's part of a greater watershed, but as you go upriver, it's really not maintained in a condition that would allow for paddling to the degree that we're talking about. So again, we're defining this water trail from the Forks essentially to the bay or Clinch Park. Some of the preliminary assumptions that we've talked to or heard from stakeholders address a wide spectrum of concerns and opportunities. And I'm going to read these, and you can see these are preliminary because, again, we're kind of evolving some of these concepts. There's a board in the back, and we want to get your feedback on it. But the first one is the water trail should balance safe recreation with ongoing conservation and restoration efforts. Time and time again, one of the most paramount things that people have told us is the conservation and restoration efforts that have been ongoing for years are really important. We want to maintain the integrity of those as we're talking about ways that we introduce more recreation opportunities on the Boardman River. So we want to make sure there's a balance there. We want to support paddling, fishing, boating, swimming, all the activities that are already going on that waterway is important. We want to make sure the water trail complements and is integrated with the surrounding land-based trails, so that connectivity that we talked about is important. Another assumption is the public has points of access to the river. We want to make sure that people are able to get to the river, and people of all abilities is an important piece of that. The river and the way it's used will continue to evolve, and so we don't really know, in many cases, how the river will function or how it will be in years to come. We have a pretty good idea, but obviously as the dams go out, that changes the character of certain places along the river. That will impact the recreational experience in some places. And so we just want to be aware that the ebb and flow, pardon the pun, changes with the river over time. Downtown Traverse City should have a better connection to the river. It's really kind of the back end of downtown in many ways. We want to make sure that that connection is strong and people are aware of that. And then the river will continue to be managed through interjurisdictional, public, private, and nonprofit partnerships. Something that's already going on. All the different groups, you can kind of see in this slide, this is just a smattering of some, but not all, the people that are doing work on the Boardman River. They all have a stake in how this is managed. We need their cooperation to do that. And we recognize that it's really done by a lot of different people. So we are working with everyone as much as we can to develop this water trail plan. And we also know that we have different people recreating on the river in different ways. We know we have people hiking next to it. We have people fishing it. We have equestrians using it. Obviously, we have kayakers and canoers using it. And we realize for a lot of people, it's their front door or back door. It goes right by their homes, and we want to respect that private property when we can. So those are all different considerations that we have when we talk about, well, how do we define what this water trail will be and what it will mean? We also know that there's specific regulations that we have to follow from the state, different designations in terms of what you can and cannot do with the property next to the river in terms of setback and vegetative buffer. We know in those sections that you see on this map, if you're going to do anything at the access sites, it does require state approval. So whether that's adding trash baskets or adding signage, that cooperation with the state is going to be really important as part of this process.
What was OH?
The ordinary high water mark. So this really is the extent, again. So this is a map, and you'll see this in the back of the room, of the entire length of the Boardman River with all the access sites identified. One of the great things about working on this river compared to others that we've done is that a lot of those access sites are well defined. So we worked in a lot of communities where they don't have this many access sites. So we're talking about where can we actually maybe purchase property. That might be something that this group would like to consider. Are there other points along the river that you think are important to provide access to? If not, let's talk about how we can make these access sites the best they can and accommodate the experiences that we're talking about. And when we talk about the Boardman River, we're really talking about, I think, two different types of experiences, two different contexts of what the Boardman River has. The first one we're just defining as kind of the natural experience, which is the Forks all the way really to the YMCA. Very much through, obviously, a lot of state land, very rugged, more of a natural landscape, and not as many kind of formal amenities. And then we're just calling it right now the urban experience, essentially from Medallie Park to Clinch Park or the Bay, has more of that urban feel. Obviously, it goes right through the heart of Traverse City, and some of the access sites are a little bit more formalized. At 12th Street, they have that ADA accessible launch. So we have two different types of experience. So as we're talking about providing amenities, are certain types of amenities more appropriate in certain areas given the context? That's something we want to hear back from you guys tonight. And obviously, most of you have paddled a lot of these sections. The natural section, here's Brownbridge Pond, how much that has been now accessed, flowing all the way to Beitner, and then all the way through Garfield Township, and then essentially to the YMCA in Medallie Park. Again, more of the natural section of the river itself. So let's start talking about some of the amenities that we have at that. So we're just going to kind of take the float down. So we start at the Forks. We have parking, camping. There is a platform, which we've heard from many people is really hard actually to use to get in your kayak. There is the ramp that you see on the bottom right that at least helps you get your kayak down to that platform, which many people have been happy to use. And it does have the restrooms. So what kind of opportunities or things do we like about this access site? What things could we add? That's what we want to hear back from everybody tonight. Then as you go down the river, we go at Ranch Rudolph, which does have access, but it doesn't really have public access. So if you go to that site, you'll see signs that say, please don't access our property. That said, if you're on the river and you need an emergency, that is a place where you could stop. So that whole relationship between public and private property is something that we're talking about as part of this process. Moving down the river to Scheck's, where we have really two places where you can access the Boardman, one by the horse camp and one by the other campground. Again, by the horse camp, it really has kind of the gravelly little on the bend there that you can pull off, and then the other spot really has that kind of hard bench or dock that makes it really hard to get into. But another popular spot for a lot of paddlers. We know a lot of people, especially the equestrians, use this, and a lot of people who are fishing the Boardman use this as an access site. Then we get to Brown Bridge, and it really has a lot of amenities, all the way from restrooms and trash receptacles. It has signage, which is something that we're going to talk about, which we don't see a lot about along the river. Not only for those folks coming by vehicle, but those folks actually on the water itself. Where is the actual landing zone for this stop? And then some warnings about how quickly it's coming up. And some of the other amenities, again, it does have that landing that we've heard is tough for people. And then getting your kayak down to this can be kind of difficult for a lot of people. So are there ways that we can figure out to make that more smooth? Then we move to Shumsky's, which has a large parking area. It does now have a trash receptacle. Again, it has that kind of tiered down a bench to get into your kayak, which again is hard for a lot of people. Then we get to Beitner, which is really another more defined access site with a large parking area, restrooms, areas for picnics, trash receptacles. We start to get in some of the signage that I think will be critical when we talk about how we're respecting the river and respecting the different people who are using the river. So we start to see some of that signage there. And you can see actually everyone is, I'm sure, familiar with the access site. And also additional signage talking about some of the risks that are associated with it. So the more that we talk about making this a defined water trail, the more important signs or this type of information is going to be critical to make sure that we're providing for a safe environment for those paddlers. And then we really have Lone Pine, which is a spot that is hard to get to, especially if you're getting on right there, considering you have that huge 150-foot down steep bank to get down to the river, the stairs. And I understand that will change a little bit, that geography will change a little bit once the dams are out, but that is an access site. Obviously, we have the two dams that we're dealing with, and that will change not only the areas and where we can access the water trail, but also the type of water or paddling experience that will be in this section. And we don't know what that's going to be yet. So all we know as part of this plan is this is something we're going to have to look at when these dams are removed. So I don't want to have any preconceived notions about what we're going to add at these locations, just noting that these will be something that we'll have to look at down the road.
You didn't mention Olson's Bridge planting.
Olson's Bridge?
Upstream of Lone Pine.
Okay,
A lot of people use that, I know I do.
okay,
Rather than use Lone Pine.
okay. Well, let's make sure we note that when we get, that's a good point. And that's just a visual of how much we know that's going to change along that section of the river, so we want to make sure that we're going to do that. I'll go through these, but obviously we're going to figure out how we're going to address these areas. And then we really get to the YMCA, which is kind of the northern terminus or the last piece of this natural section. Now Garfield Township has been working with the YMCA and actually has a grant into the Department of Natural Resources to make this a more formal access site. But we still want to hear from you what other amenities might be appropriate for this area. But this is actually one site that Garfield Township is working at making some other amenities to. So that's, again, that natural section. Now we get into the more urban section, which is really thinking about Medalli Park and then all the way into the bay. Now, I put that yellow line on there just to give a kind of a visual of what a trail might look like. But as you know, you can really paddle anywhere you want. So this line doesn't have to be defined like this, but just to show you the extent of what we're talking about. As that moves into downtown Traverse City, it comes up on a lot of impediments, obviously, and then into the bay. A lot of the stakeholders that we talked about thought that Clench Park, given the fact that it has all the amenities, the restrooms, and it has a place where you can rent kayaks, makes it a good spot for kind of the terminus of that section. So we look at Medalli Park, and I understand right now that the 231 outfitter is actually running kayaks and canoes out of this park using that little bench that you see here on the bottom right. But it does already have a lot of amenities that would make it an ideal trailhead for this section of the water trail. In terms of restrooms and parking to pavilion, potable water, it really has a lot of those amenities. So we think this could be an ideal spot or an ideal location for that trailhead for this section of the river. Then we have 16th Street, which has been added onto in terms of the amenities in the last year. This is a spot for the paddle and points, obviously, that go up to the brewery, but now there's these stairs. There's really no amenities on the water itself, and I know there's a lot of folks that have been concerned about what it's doing to erosion and what's that doing to the actual landscape down there. But we know that people are using it, so we're defining that as a stop, at least right now, for the water trail. 12th Street, which is actually a great facility with the accessible launch. It's really hard to then get your kayak down to it. So it has some things going against it, but it does have some amenities that we're looking at in terms of providing universal access for most paddlers that we're trying to do. So we have some things that we're looking at for 12th Street. And then Hull Park is really that northern edge of Boardman Lake is another great access site with a lot of different amenities and enough land and water frontage to provide some of those accessible launches that we're going to talk about. So another great opportunity, plus the connectivity to all the other different resources that are near Hull Park makes it a great spot. As you come down the Boardman, you get to Union Street Dam, which is a very significant impediment for paddlers. Right now, people are actually, there's a sign on that top right picture that tells you where to get off at the dam. Then you really have to kind of zigzag your way around that property and kind of plunk your kayak down here right in front of the bridge, and it's really not an accessible spot. So part of this process is thinking about ways that we can make this transition from this portion across the Union Street Dam a lot more amenable to paddlers. Your ideas will be helpful in doing that. And then obviously we snake through downtown. So then we go by Hanley Park, and we go by some of the new developments that has landing zones, not necessarily stops, but you can access the river. You can get off the river at these areas. Then you have, as you kind of go around by the fish weir, we do have some impediment that was really only for about 2 months out of the year in the fall, but it is open other times. And you can kind of see that business is made a little bit of a tiered step as a portage? Are there ways that we might want to figure out to make that, again, more amenable to paddlers? Or could that portage be in another location along this bend? As part of the new pedestrian bridge and some of the work that's been done along this section of the river includes these kind of step-down pieces, which again is that access. Do we want to direct people to this one, or do we just want to have this and people can kind of figure that on their own? And then as you go all the way up to the river, the city has this boat launch. They actually have additional plans right now to make improvements to that launch. What would be a great for paddlers, or what would paddlers like to see in that location? Or again, part of the discussion that we want to have. Then we get to Clinch Park, which is again kind of that terminus, which we know has a lot of those amenities. There's actually an ADA accessible launch that I think may be going in next year, but we do have at least plans to have that. But it has all the other amenities that you might associate with a kind of a typical trailhead in terms of the restrooms, access to downtown. You have people renting kayaks here as kind of that end terminus of the Watertrail. So that's the rundown in terms of the geography. Some of the things that we hope that you'll consider or talk to us about are things like storage. So are there places along the river or places along the Boardman Lake where it might be appropriate to have a kayak rack that you could get off the river, lock it up, and go get lunch somewhere? Some communities are looking at kayak storages like a municipal boat slip, where instead of after work going home, putting your kayak on your car and then taking it down, you would actually leave it in a locker system down at wherever you like to access the river all summer long. There's different ways you can do that. This was done in downtown Rochester. This is 4 blocks from downtown Rochester on the Clinton River. This is an Eagle Scout project. This is in Utica, also in the Clinton River, and that's just a simple locking system. So there's different ways to do that. The Huron River Watertrail, which goes from Milford all the way through Ann Arbor, Dexter to Lake Erie, is actually a national water trail, and they are developing these kind of big formal lockers right now at all the key access sites along the Huron River. Something to think about. Maybe that's amenity that we want to have at certain locations. If we do, help us figure out where is the most appropriate place for that along the river. Obviously, the habitat restoration, that's been going on for a while, and we want to make sure that, again, we're balancing that and we're aware of those activities. So we'll talk a lot about signage. So signage is really helpful for many different ways. It helps talk about the actual water trail or recreational resource itself. It can guide people along the river. These are signs on the tip of the thumb Heritage Water Trail that alerts paddlers on the Great Lakes where they can get in and off of the Great Lakes. But signage also does a lot with awareness. So signage can talk about the habitat restoration, what that means to this project, how that plays with the water trail. It can talk about boater safety. It can talk about how we balance the needs of other people that are using the river, fishermen and so forth. So signage, I think, is going to be a really big and key component of this overall project that really sets the tone for everything. And then we have opportunities to put that along the trail in different ways. So we GPSed all the different crossings of the Boardman River from the Forks to the Bay, about 51 different crossings. Some are roads, some are bridges, but those are opportunities to put signs that say 8 more miles to Medalli or something like that to kind of give that wayfinding piece to it. Things that we want to consider or talk about as part of this. I mentioned a little bit about the universal accessible design, and this is something that a lot of communities, all those 41 water trails that I just talked about earlier, they're all looking at implementing these types of systems. And they're really great for people of all abilities. So what we found is that even if you're not disabled, you prefer this type of way to get into the water, because what's the hardest thing to get in your kayak or canoe sometimes? These are great systems. You actually sit on the platform right here, and you just really just sit yourself in the kayak, and these are on rollers. You just roll yourself right in, roll yourself right out. There's one at this 12th Street. So if you go to the 12th Street in Traverse City, there is one of these right there. Again, it's just hard to get to it because it's down that hill. So we've been talking a little bit about ways or locations that might be ideal for this type of launch system. Some ideas about portages. This is again on the Huron River, where they have a pretty significant incline and portage, and they've essentially made one of the state's longest kayak ramps. You don't actually sit in your kayak and go on the ramp. You probably could, but they built this system so you just carry it down this ramp, and so you're not trying to lug it over your shoulders or dragging it. So there's innovative ways that we can talk about how we get around these portages. You might have seen some in other locations or know of some. Again, that's what we want to hear, from everybody tonight. Part of becoming a water trail is then you really start to brand it. You start to market it as a water trail. You define it as a water trail. One way to do that, again, with the signage, but also with maps. So we're going to talk about ways that we can collectively develop water trail maps where we identify all the access sites. And we can talk about language. If you're looking for this type of experience, go to access site A, B, and C. If you're looking for a natural experience, go to the other one. So you can start to direct people to the type of experience that they're looking for through things like mapping and signage. This is like a paddler's companion handbook that some water trails are doing to really kind of talk about that. And you can make that into a web version very easily, or an app on your phone. And then the other thing that we've been talking about is the experiences, how people are having those experiences. We know that we have people using the waterways for their business. And there's been some discussion about what's appropriate for different places along the river. We want to hear your feedback on that. But we know that people are using this resource for that. And then the last part that we're going to be talking about is this trail towns concept, which is how do we connect the river or some of these paddling experiences to downtowns or part of the economic development piece of our community. Obviously, when we're talking about Traverse City, there's a great opportunity to do that considering the spine goes right through the downtown. But there might be other parts like Medalley Park that are appropriate for that connection. Different places around the state are looking at ways to make those connections more formal, and they're doing plans. If you just see the Photoshop where they're kind of adding these paddler plazas, so to speak, where they're making that again a more formal piece. So again, as I said, after tonight's meeting, we're going to start to really identify what are some of those priorities, what are some of the assumptions that we want to hear from everybody, and then develop our plan at least by September. So before we get into the hands-on exercises, are there just some overall comments or concerns or questions about the water? Yes.
You mentioned that in April you had a meeting of the stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders?
So the stakeholders, let me go back here. Garfield Township, TARC, Grand Traverse Parks and Recreation, the Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, CRA, Trout Unlimited, Conservation District, Paddling Club, different outfitters. If you'd like to join that stakeholder group, you're more than welcome to. Again, if you sign up in the back, you'll get information on those meetings. There's only been 3 of those meetings, so we have plenty more to do, and we are welcoming all folks to those.
Was the DNR one of the stakeholders at any of the meetings?
They were invited. They haven't participated in the meetings, but we have talked to them in kind of smaller focus group discussions. Yes.
I was wondering about the water trails that are already developed in Michigan, and if there has been any way to track changes in the use of those waterways since the trail maps were developed.
Yeah, there's been not a lot of data in terms of numbers on what that's done. The Huron River Water Trail, which is the one I mentioned that goes from Milford to Lake Erie, goes through Ann Arbor. The county, Washtenaw County, did an economic study of that water trail. They claim it's added $33 million to the county's economy in terms of participation. If you've been to the Argo Falls in Ann Arbor, which is that kind of float down, man-made float down area, 80,000 people a summer are going to that. It's the only part of the Parks and Recreation Division that's making money for the city of Ann Arbor. So we don't have a lot of information on all the other 41. If you saw on that, there is an actual Lake Michigan water trail, so this trail would connect to that. Most people don't know it's there because they haven't done the signage and the awareness. So a lot of these are kind of really grassroots efforts that are starting to build up, but more and more communities are doing that. The communities that have done the signage and the mapping, they have seen an increase in the amount of people using that waterway. Numbers, though, I couldn't tell you, but empirical evidence is showing that.
Yeah, Harry, and I've spoken on this before, but I didn't see anything about balancing the ecological integrity of the river as a living system and the recreational use, because that's very critical. In fact, over the 4th of July weekend at Brown Bridge, there were 40, almost 50 cars and trailers down below accessing. And just this past weekend, it was packed. The river's packed. I don't know how much more the river can accommodate without starting to see a decline in its ecological integrity. So where does that fit into this plan?
It's a conversation that has to happen and continue to happen. If you go back to our assumptions, that's actually one of the first assumptions is we have to figure out what that balance is. How many cars are too many cars in an access site? I think that's a conversation that we continue to have. Part of this will evolve over time, and I know that, you know, to your point, Steve, everyone we've talked to wants to have that balance there. So there's been discussions about load capacity, but we haven't gotten there yet. So yeah. Let's go start. We'll just go around the room like this way. Yes.
Yeah, Harry. I was wondering, at this point in time, who's taking care of the river as far as when there's downfall? Who's responsible for taking out that downfall, and then whose criteria are they using when they clean up the river?
Steve, do you mind helping with that question?
Well,
That would be Steve.
we had, it's nobody's true responsibility. The DNR won't do it, so the Conservation District has taken that on. And we work closely with the DNR fisheries so that you just leave enough for reasonable navigation and the remainder for aquatic habitat. But oftentimes others will come through and cut out more than what is really necessary. But it's a balance, but it's really nobody's responsibility who's been taking it on, because we've been working with Norm and the Traverse Area Paddle Club and Trout Unlimited and volunteers to do this.
That would be one of my concerns, and we ran into that downstate in the Shiawassee area where the woman that started that cleanup, her idea of a clean river is, yeah, short, big debate.
8-foot draft
Yeah,
instead of
and,
4-foot draft.
so I'm just concerned, whose criteria, who's going to be responsible for that,
So I think that determining what that criteria is up to groups like this. So we can say in our plan, no, in terms of,
nobody's responsible, then who's to say that I can't take my canoe down there with a chainsaw because I don't like that downfall and clean it out?
what I'm saying is that if we collectively say the intent of this river or water trail should be to support or continue on with the existing management ways in terms of the down trees, then that's something that we collectively can do. Now, as Steve mentioned, it depends on who's doing some of that work, but that's why we want to have them as part of this discussion to make sure that we're establishing what that framework is.
So in the last 2 years, I've pulled no less than a dozen people out of the river. I've had to take them with their equipment to wherever they were at. If they were injured, that river is not easy to kayak for the average person or canoe. I appreciate the fact accessibility, but in the pictures you're showing on some of those bodies of water, they're fast, they're slow, they're wide, they're unencumbered. This is a wild river. The average person struggles, and the person that has inability to get in and out of the kayak is at great risk. And again, I am absolutely all for accessibility, but I personally have bandaged, repaired, I've cut kayaks and canoes out of jams. I've had to, and it's such a capacity issue. And the fact is you open it up, more people are going to come, and they're not going to have those skill sets. And I'm taking young kids down, my nieces and nephews, and teaching them. But as Steve mentioned, on holiday, there was one area that had no less than 40 people just tearing the banks apart. And that's at the capacity of the parking that's already pushed to the limit. So as a key stakeholder, there are almost 400 feet of this riverbank. I'm really concerned. And I will be at all the next meetings. all the way through, because when you talk about stakeholders, not only the citizens of the state and our local community here, but the people that live on the river are the primary stakeholders in this. And I live there for the natural beauty, for the solitude. I want people accessing the river. I want people to enjoy it as much as I do. So there's got to be a real balance, and this concerns me.
I agree, and that's why we want to hear from what your consideration of balance is. So if there's places along the river where you say, I don't want to see any more improvements, that's what you want to hear from you tonight. We're not here telling you this is where the improvements should go or this is what the improvements should be. It's up to this community to figure out what extent those are. There might be some sections where you say, don't direct people on those river. We can do that as well. That's where the signage comes in, and all the guides and all that kind of stuff tells people this is a dangerous area. These are where you should not paddle if you've never paddled before. That information leads to those experiences not happening as much frequency as may be happening now.
I don't know if this is relevant, but for what you're doing. But what I would love to see is the river being alcohol-free. Not free alcohol. But in fact, we've done a lot of paddling in Florida, and they have several rivers where there are no disposable containers allowed. No chip bags, no disposable bottles of anything, no cans. And there's somebody checking you when you start. And we clean the river, we take care of the down trees for a very minimal amount. And if, I wonder, all those people that you're pulling out, how many of them are sober?
Well, I would say the majority of them aren't, man, but I'll tell you what, is when they're dumping, glass bottles are floating
We
down the
know,
river and the
right.
trash and everything.
Yes,
We
you're
have
not
to
allowed
clean
to
it up,
put
so-
glass.
No glass.
And glass is not allowed on Michigan rivers, but nobody's checking, nobody
Or
knows.
lakes.
No.
Or
And I
lakes,
get that.
But
We
but
picked it up, the
if
station,
we,
pick it all up.
it would cost money to enforce that, but that would be a dream come true.
I think, again, that goes back to the signage and the promotional pieces. You can have a story or talk about that. You can say what the damage that does to the river, what we're doing in terms of keeping it clean, and try to discourage that type of use. That's why the formal side of these access sites with the signage is so important, I think. It kind of dictates, hopefully, what the experience should be for those paddlers, what we're trying to get in terms of respectability of that waterway.
And I have one other thing.
Sure.
In the Traverse Area Paddle Club, most of our trips are limited to between 10 and 15 people as a maximum, usually about 12. I keep track, I'm the outings chair, so I keep track of, there's a club in Grand Rapids that literally will have a trip on the Boardman on a Saturday with 75 people. And if, I just make sure that none of our leaders conflict with them. But I find that frightening. I don't want to go anywhere near there. And I've called the people who are in charge and say, how can you put that many people on? Are you picking up trash? Where are you parking? And they don't really have an answer for me. So that's a real concern for me. If we have big parking areas, I don't know, I guess they're parking on the road.
We do park on the road.
Yes.
Yeah, this was just following up on that. That's where it's very important to have at the landings, outhouses and trash containers. Because if there is no trash container, the average person just pitches it.
Well, they put it in the toilet.
But there should be a trash can too.
Yes.
So something like that, monitor that periodically.
Yes.
Maybe you could clarify what your output is, right? And that would help us give you input, right? Because I'm not clear on what it is. So for example, would your plan be a plan that says, we recommend that there be a governing body that decides how you are going to do
Right.
River maintenance? Okay, so tell us a little more about
Right.
what the output of this exercise
Right.
is, so
So
we can understand how to help.
The output is exactly that, is as a recommendation or a plan with recommendations in it, based on the feedback that we've heard from this community. What are at the access sites? What types of uses do we want to allow or not allow? What type of river experience are we trying to highlight or at least trying to showcase? It's really just a guide to how we potentially could develop this water trail system. How it's implemented, that part we don't have a good idea on because we have different jurisdictions and different bodies, as you can see across this room, implementing things in different ways. But if we had a common understanding that said every access site, or at least these 7 should have trash receptacles and other amenities, then those jurisdictions or the folks managing those access sites could work together to then make sure that that's a minimum standard at some of those access sites. Does that answer your question? Or is it still too vague?
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand that there are grant monies available that you guys captured to put together a study with what are going to be the stakeholders to come up with a plan to recommend to the municipalities what would be a best practice as a standard for all the access sites, or potentially more access sites, which is concerning. And I get the whole thing, but then the plan then isn't mandated, but it's unfunded. And that gentleman asked about an outcome. So now you have a plan that has no funding, and then there'll be stakeholders like, in this case, the county, a township, or a state of Michigan, which all 3 are financially strapped, and we're asking them to put in more trash receptacles to be maintained and people to maintain it, bathroom facilities, and so on. So I appreciate the idea, okay, and I think you're in for a big challenge, but I think it's good, but again, the answer isn't signs, because I can tell you right now, I got signs that says no trespassing on my property, and let me tell you, you might as well say, welcome.
I'm not suggesting that signs are the only answer to this. I'm not, yeah.
Coming up next, caution, poison ivy. Now, that's gonna change. Anyways, I don't want to, but I understand what you're trying to do.
I'd like to say one thing. Trash cans and toilets are remarkably inexpensive. Remarkably inexpensive. A trash can costs $20 a month. And America, you don't need to hire anyone to take care of it. American Waste, you can drive right up to it, pick it up, dump it, and go, just like they do at your house or your business. So that's cheap. And as far as the toilets, if you're lucky, you can get one for free like we did at Brown Bridge, but they're around $5,000. And that's very inexpensive, and it costs a couple $100 to have them pumped once a year or every 2 years. But what's expensive is, moving dirt around and making parking lots and making roads and things like that. That's expensive. And so don't be concerned about the price of toilets and trash cans.
Oh, I'm not.
It's
But I
everything
said
else.
Township meetings, sir, and they don't have any money.
Well, okay.
Well,
So
that's what-
the Paddle Club and the Boardman River Clean Sweep is providing for several trash cans, and we've been very fortunate to get toilets in places here and there. But that's not what this meeting is about. But what the meeting is about is making a plan. And there's one more thing I want to say. Has anyone thought about what's going to happen when they take out these dams, especially Sabin and the one at Cass Road?
Boardman Dam.
The Boardman Dam, yeah. Because at those 2 locations, those lakes are very short, and when you take out a dam and there's not a lot of room for the water to take up the drop, because normally the Boardman drops 9 feet a mile, but this is going to drop like 22 feet a mile, is that right,
30,
Steve?
about
30. So that's going to be a whitewater river. I mean, the Nantahala River drops 36 feet a mile, and it's a heck of a river. So we're going to have some whitewater places here. And so I feel it's a great opportunity to have like the Midwest's premier whitewater park in that one area, and just have it for whitewater paddlers, and have like a little side, a sneak around for everybody else, like us old people like me. But I think it's a great opportunity, and I would like to make sure that gets put in the plan.
Steve, and then I'll go in the back.
Go ahead and let this.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
I mean, I applaud that you're trying to do something. I've used the river for over 20 years, and I think there's changes coming on it. I think that's what we're all seeing, is that there's all these changes, and there is no political body in place that can take your plan. For me, I'm trying to vision, just like this gentleman's question, give me, what's the end result? And there's no political body currently in place that can manage this, right? So it's we have to have I have to have somewhat of a leap of faith that this is gonna take my suggestions and everybody else's and mold that into something that we can digest.
Right now, we have Garfield Township and the City of Traverse City are making planned improvements to the YMCA property and down at the mouth of the Boardman River. So we have local jurisdictions doing those improvements. Would it be helpful if they had a document that said, as you're considering those improvements, this is what our community said in terms of sign standards or accessible access, that type of thing? Would that be helpful for them as they're pursuing those grants already?
You're gonna have to stop saying signs every time you talk.
Okay, well,
No offense, but I see these same people on the river. I bailed a couple of people out, and it's the best suggestion I heard so far out of this group was reducing the input at a time. So the slug of people that go through is somewhat not chaos, because it is a tricky river. I paddled it when Steve was in the front page of the paper and said no one should be on the river.
Oh, you're that guy.
And it was a hell of a lot of fun. And we didn't tip, we had a great time. Yes, we did cut something.
I forget, yeah, you're right.
But this is tricky. This is real tricky, and I don't want to trivialize it by saying a sign's going to help. Not that signs aren't warranted, but this is really tricky because it's a natural asset to our community that I think is totally underutilized as well as overutilized at the same time. And so, patience. I don't like your timeline, quite frankly. I don't know how you're going to come to a good conclusion in a couple of months when this is only the first time you've heard of me.
August is in 3 days.
So I'm just catching up to speed, so I apologize if I slow you down here.
no. These are what we want to hear.
And Harry, to build on what Randy said, is that we need that other plan, that recreational plan, that identifies the transgressors, that identifies these issues before we put another line on a map that says Watertrail, before we develop a brochure that says come here and experience the Boardman, because it's the cart before the horse. We need the other plan, the recreation plan that does identify who the managing body is going to be, who's going to keep the river clear, who's going to shoulder that responsibility and liability, and who's going to maintain these access points. So we need, first off, that other plan, the recreation plan, watershed plan, basically.
I mean, I totally agree with Steve, but I see literally hundreds of people showing up for beer parties coming down and paddling through town. Not that I'm opposed to that, but it raises my question of how does this really fit into this scheme of things? And to me, it's that's also a cart in front of the horse.
And one
Yeah,
more
that's what I'm
one is there's also
Can't stop.
popular
It's free.
stopping areas, not pull-outs and lanes, launches, but popular stopping areas where people will stop and by 20, 30, 40 at a time and party, and that is just like Mark said, it's destroying the banks. And we've restored a lot of these banks to the point that they are able to stand foot traffic, but there's others out there that are really
Yes.
So it's the whole point of this is creating this, economics, that generates how much money for the community. And, we build it, those things, we build it, they'll come. And I'm thinking it's like, what I'm not hearing is, to me, the number one thing should be, how do we maintain the integrity of this river for a long time?
Absolutely.
I just keep hearing it's like, we're gonna have brochures and I just, that really concerns me, the long term, it's more development, make it easier for more people to get on the river. And it's gonna be like Traverse City, it's a kiss of death.
Okay. That's the balance that we've heard from a lot of folks, is how do you balance the conservation work that's already been done with the idea that more people will be using this resource if we start to promote it. However, if we promote it better or talk about better ways to use it, would they use it in a different way? I'm hearing the answer is no, but do you think that that would help in terms, this is what I want to hear back, do you think that would help at all?
Everybody in this room is from this area, we love the river,
Right.
we cherish it. But unfortunately, we're a small group. I mean, it's like you say, you get 70 people come in, they come down from downstate, you know, if you got property up, you get the same thing.
We
They
live
just
here, we
don't
take
respect
care
it.
of it.
And
They don't-
Yeah, they're here.
They're here, they're gone. They're gone in 30 seconds past my house, but the damage is done.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go here first.
Well, a couple questions. You mentioned, we all know about the groups that go down, the drinking groups, and they go, and I'm not just talking about them, but there is that, do you happen to know what the status of that quote-unquote new pier that's supposed to be built at the end? Because I can't see, first of all, I can't see paddlers who can't really paddle very well get stuck in the wind when they're 500 feet out into the bay and try and get back to Clinch Park easily. So that's that's one of the concerns that when I heard they were building this pier, it's like, are you crazy? You know, no offense, it's kind of hard once you're just coming around that bend in the first place if it's windy, and it's always windy usually. And then the other thing that I thought of when you were talking is, so you want to think of different places for the river trail? Well, maybe you could start at Boardman Lake and go north.
Absolutely.
So that you could leave the wilderness
Yeah.
wild. Just don't promote it. They'll find out about, the people who want to go on that will find out about it. But like, don't promote it because, yeah, we go down it at least once a week. And just trash and the banks, we see it all the time.
That could be the extent of, if you want to define this as a water trail, that could be the geographic extent. We don't have to start at the forks. All I'm saying is right now, people are using the forks and going to the bay. If we collectively say, we're going to brand a water trail and we want it from Medallia to the bay, then that's perfectly fine. So this group or this community is helping to define what that geography is.
why not this concept of keeping it as more of a natural, quote, wilderness adventure? I mean, you go up to the UP, you go to Isle Royal, you go to the Boundary Waters. They don't have trash receptacles. The attitude is you carry it in, you carry it out. We don't have elaborate port. You got to put a canoe on your back and you carry it. You know.
Again, I don't have the prescription for that. Yeah.
That's the concept that should be followed.
Absolutely.
Let's keep the
So-
river as natural as we possibly can.
So-
Least amount of development.
Let me take one more question, because I know you had your hand up, but that's exactly what the point of these boards is, and the discussion that we want to have tonight is to talk about that exact thing. What don't we want to have, or what can we have?
We're gonna have a discussion after we go to the boards? Is there gonna be more discussion, or we just?
We're going to do the boards, we're going to have another meeting, another public meeting that will talk about the results of this, but that won't be tonight. I'm sorry, let's go to you first, ma'am.
As a total newbie, what I'm hearing is that you have now on the Boardman a problem that is getting bigger and bigger. So it seems like doing something is better than doing nothing. So some kind of planning and some kind of solutions seems to be where you're headed here rather than just complaining about the situation as it is. But that's coming to be.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think that, I just want to make sure we got this. So I think what we heard from several people is, a specific recommendation is that should be in the plan, is that step one is there should be a recreation plan that studies what is the capacity of the river by section, what is the load on the river by section, right? That should be step one of the record. I believe that's what Steve Largent is saying. I believe that's what several of us are saying. Step one, that's our that should be, you know, before you do anything else, right? Before you build, you know, is the study, what is the recreation plan? And you guys would be in a position by looking at other rivers of similar size, what is a reasonable load? What is a reasonable ecological load, and what are we at? Then you can start talking about whether or not you can or should or you know, encourage or discourage further usage, right? But to say we should put in better ramps to encourage more usage before you've answered the question, what is our load and what is our capacity, seems a little backwards.
Okay.
And who the managing body is.
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah, that was the other part of the recommendation, right? Is how is the river managed? The recommendation is there needs to be a management by section, right? Because it's gonna be different. The kind of management we need, we don't need to worry about somebody's trimming trees in the middle of Boardman Lake.
Or how do we get unity amongst those managing entities so that they're reflecting this development plan?
So if you don't mind, I want to take all those comments and get them on paper. 'Cause I don't have a flip chart with me, so the only way to get all these comments is actually have you help us write them all down. So
And isn't there a section of the river that's designated now, it's not wilderness, but it's natural?
Natural river, that river.
yes,
Is it, which, what's the?
It's from
that wide
131 down to just below Saban Dam, there's different.
Oh, just below Saban.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
so let me just point out what the bores are in the back. So on this side, we have basically green dot, red dot. Is this something that's a positive or something that's a negative by pictures? We have 3 boards. One is the experience itself. Is this the kind of experience we want to have on the river? Then the other one's related to public access, and the other one is amenities. So there's things that you like or don't like, you put that color sticker right on that picture. Then we have the preliminary assumptions. I say preliminary because this is why we're talking, as to what are these assumptions, do they make sense? Do they need to be rewritten? Are we missing anything? We can add to that. On the back are a series of boards. This is the entire length from the forks to the bay that talk about what's along that river. Are there places that where you want to see additional access, or do you want to at least help us point out where is that landing zone where we see 40 kayaks and we don't want that to happen anymore? That's why I want you to help identify in those maps. And then on this side, you'll see boards that really give you an opportunity to write exactly what your feelings are, what you want to see, what you don't want to see. All the way to the unique features or obstacles or concerns that you have for specific sections. This is that northern section from Medallion Park to Clinch. This is from the Forks to the YMCA. These are just other general questions. What does the Boardman River mean to you? I'm guessing there's a lot of good reaction that's going to be on this board, obviously. What are other things that we need to include or consider? So again, we're still at a very much early beginning planning process. By no means do we have anything set in stone. This is really an opportunity for you to give us feedback on what your concerns are.
Organize it.